CBS News royal contributor Amanda Foreman is with us now over the phone. Amanda, talk to us about one thing we've been wondering here is, well, actually, we can see you, not over the phone. Thanks for joining us in the flesh. All right, Amanda, we were wondering, who can take over these public-facing duties? I would imagine that Prince William would have that. We were just listening to our partners at the Weather Channel, the BBC, talking about Camilla and her prominent figure. But I know that the king has advocated for a slimmed-down monarchy. What would that mean, given an incident or an event like this one, where he cannot present or face the public in those types of duties, and who could take over those roles?
Well, this is exactly what Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had feared. It was one of the things that she said very openly a couple of years ago, that she disagreed with the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy, because one never knew when there might be a catastrophic event that prevented not just one, but several royals from doing their job. And unfortunately, her words proved to be prophetic. The slimmed-down monarchy that when Prince Charles was Prince Charles, before he became king, isn't the slimmed-down monarchy that we have today. He never imagined that the Duke of York would be no longer a member of the working royal family. He never imagined that his son Harry would no longer be a member of the working royal family. So this is unprecedented in the 1,000-year history of the royal family, to have so many important key figures of the royal family out of action at the same time.
You know, Amanda, we just heard our partners at the BBC talking about how they got more information in this health announcement about the king than they might have under prior, than they might have thought the palace would be willing to release. What do you make in general about the statement we have, and also what we don't have, and what the palace might be thinking as the whole world dives into a discussion of the king's very intimate parts and his prognosis?
Well, there's two things to bear in mind. The first is that the palace will have had some time to prepare this statement. It's not like we're getting this in real time, as they are getting the news as well. So they will have known that things were up, and they will have had some, at the very least, a few days that there was a medical emergency. And it may be that the timing of the Princess of Wales's operation could have been pushed up ahead because of this. We don't know. But the palace almost never does this kind of thing on the hop. It will have been planned. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that you are right. There are lots of things that we don't know. And in fact, by being this open, which is part of King Charles's modernizing strategy, it does also warn the public that there may be more bad news ahead.
That was one thing that we were speculating, and of course we can only speculate at this point. We don't have enough information. But in talking about how Harry is heading over to visit his father, Prince Harry, and how how serious would that be in terms of what kind of indication of how serious the cancer might be? Talk to us a little bit about how much can we assume, given that relationship with the royal family in general has been so fractured, and what were the latest, I guess, developments in terms of that relationship?
Well, as we know, that relationship has not mended in any appreciable sense in the last year. But now we are at an inflection point. The royal family's at an inflection point, but so are Harry and Meghan's relationship with the public at an inflection point. Because whatever differences that exist within that family, at a life crisis, the public, indeed any family, expects everyone to come together, to put their differences behind them, to work towards reconciliation, and to pull together. And any sign that there's an unwillingness to do that will have repercussions, and not good ones, for Prince Harry and Meghan.
And in terms of who could take over those public-facing duties, engagements, do you suppose that will go to Prince William now?
Well, yes. So there are still senior members of the royal family, as our colleague at BBC said, in particular the Princess Royal and Prince William. The older generation are somewhat too old at this point. The Duke of Gloucester, it would be a strain on them. But Prince Edward and Sophie, they're very popular royals, and they can step forward as well. But after that, it's slim pickings.
We want to make sure, right, to inform the public who is joining us now. Well, the breaking news is what we know from the palace is that King Charles has some form of cancer. That it was discovered through a procedure. They were checking out his enlarged prostate, which, according to Dr. Avis, is something pretty normal to happen to men after a certain age. And they have discovered a separate issue, which is the finding of cancer. What type of cancer? We do not know. Well, they have not said.
Dr. Agus, as a cancer doctor himself, his hypothesis was that the standard procedure that you undertake for an enlarged prostate would remove specks of the prostate, which then, under the normal course of things, would be looked at. And most times they're looked at, everything's okay. In this case, and this is his speculation as a doctor in the field, right, they might have discovered some form of cancer. What is also unknown, again, whether it's prostate cancer or not, unknown, but that's the theory.
And we don't know what type of screen. I mean, given that this is the king and he is 75 years old, they might have done a full check on him as part of that.
They might have.
We don't know.
But do we still have Amanda? Is Amanda listening to this ramble and hoot?
We do.
Okay, so I'm curious. The decision to announce cancer but leave it only as a, quote, form of cancer, which on the one hand is transparency, but on the other hand invites rampant speculation. So if you want to tamp it down, this only really increases it. What do you make of that decision to use that very particular phrase, a form of cancer?
I think that in my professional opinion, that is a warning to expect more news and not positive news. That's what I make of it.
Wow. Okay.
So they're not known to be this transparent. This could be an indication of something that is greater. It's not, as you were saying, it's not normal that they would come out and say, look, the release, the communication from the palace says today he is beginning treatment. Yeah. I mean, he just underwent that procedure a week ago. So the fact that they are rushing to or communicating is either an indication of extreme transparency, what you're saying is not typical of the royal family, or a sign that there's more news to come.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, and that's your professional opinion. I want to underscore another aspect of Dr. Agus's professional opinion as a cancer doctor. He said that the radiation treatment, which would be done Monday through Friday for 7 to 8 weeks, the unknown, the variable that the public does not know, is how aggressive this type of cancer is, wherever it is in the body. And there's something called a Gleason score, which will only be known to the royal family and their doctors. And that is that score will tell you the prognosis. That will tell you how assertive this cancer intends to be in the life of King Charles and how hard the fight will be. So yeah, we really have not a lot to go on at this hour. And it's interesting, your professional thought that more bad news could be to come. It does dovetail with Prince Harry flying back. I wonder, the psychological component of healing is big. It's something that Dr. Agus also talks about. It's a family fight when a loved one has cancer. What is the health in general, if you had to give a health score to the family life of the royal family with all that is going on, things that we hear, things that we talk about? I mean, you've been following it more closely than any of us.
Yes, well, one of the things that happened the last time the royal family had a major crisis, what Queen Elizabeth had called the annus horribilis, when her children were getting divorced. Windsor Castle had a terrible fire. There was a huge row about her taxes. And there was so much fragmentation then. People were talking about monarchy falling apart, splitting apart. But actually what happened was that after the initial shock, they really drew together and became stronger, amazingly stronger, and actually also sacked some people, hired some people. And so it was a kind of clean sweep. And my understanding is that this has also been going on in the last few months as well, that they had a terrible time, but at the same time, that, as often happens, it's been a springboard for a spring clean, a get together, talking more and working together better. And actually, you can see this in the way they have parceled out their duties, in the way that they often now coordinate their activities, even in little tiny simple signs. How many times do you see the royal women wearing outfits that complement each other? So you can see that there's quite a deep level of coordination going on now, which didn't used to happen quite so much.
Well, deepening the mystery here, and this is a tangential back to the prostate cancer conversation. Dr. Agus had that theory that it might be prostate cancer based on how it would be discovered on the enlarged prostate procedure. But the palace is saying, according to our partners at the BBC, and forgive me if I missed this conversation earlier, they are saying it is not prostate cancer.
They're already confirming it is not, because the initial statement said they made sure to say it was a separate issue of concern was noted.
Boy.
So
okay.
now they're being more specific, perhaps, in their communication.
Wow.
And that is something important because, I mean, people will speculate, people will want to know more. They will begin assessing the seriousness of something. And of course, we were talking, if it is prostate cancer, there's so many treatments that are available. There is so much that can be done. The science is at a certain place. And so that gives a great deal of hope, as is the case with a cancer diagnosis in any family. But if it is not, and we don't know what it is, who knows? Who knows?
Very.
Yeah, and it might be in the best interest of the royal family to actually be forthcoming and transparent and let the people know exactly what kind of prognosis we're talking about.
Amanda Foreman, Ramy Inocencio, Dr. David Agus, our partners at the BBC, thank you all for helping us navigate this breaking news.